A billionaire heiress thought she owned the world, shattering a crystal goblet at a plus-sized waitress's feet just for a cruel laugh. But she didn't know the mysterious VIP she was trying to impress ruled the night. What he did next didn't just silence the room, it changed history. The crystal chandeliers of Le Petit Chateau Manhattan's most unapologetically elitist restaurant cast a brilliant, unforgiving light on everything beneath them. Reservations here were not made, they were inherited. Tonight the dining room hummed with the quiet, expensive murmurs of hedge fund managers, tech moguls, and trust fund socialites. And then there was Clara Jenkins. Clara was 24, carrying 40 extra pounds of stress weight, and currently balancing a silver tray that held a $3,000 bottle of vintage Bordeaux. Her heavy-duty orthopedic shoes squeaked faintly against the imported Italian marble floors, a sound she prayed the string quartet in the corner would drown out. Her uniform felt tight across her chest, the stiff collar scratching her neck as sweat beaded at her temples. She was exhausted. It was her 14th consecutive day working a double shift to afford her younger sister's tuition and her own staggering medical debt. At table 4, bathed in the soft glow of a table lamp, sat Chloe Harrington. Chloe was the ruthless, razor-thin heiress to the Harrington real estate empire. Dressed in a backless, emerald silk gown that cost more than Clara's annual salary, Chloe drummed her perfectly manicured nails against the crisp white tablecloth. She was waiting for a man, not just any man, but Dominic Ashford, the notoriously elusive billionaire who had recently relocated his vast, shadowy conglomerate from London to New York. Chloe's father had arranged this dinner, hinting that a marriage alliance with Ashford would make the Harringtons untouchable. "Where is he?" Chloe snapped, her voice cutting through the ambient noise like a serrated knife. She glared at the entrance, then shifted her icy blue eyes to Clara, who was carefully approaching to pour the water. "And why is it so hot in here? Is she sweating on my table?" Clara felt a hot flush of humiliation crawl up her neck. She kept her eyes glued to the water glass, her hands trembling slightly. "I apologize, Miss Harrington. I can ask the floor manager to adjust the climate control." "Don't speak to me unless I ask you a direct question," Chloe sneered, leaning back and looking Clara up and down with visceral disgust. "God, doesn't management have weight requirements anymore? You're ruining the aesthetic of my evening. You look like a stuffed sausage in that vest." Clara bit the inside of her cheek so hard she tasted copper. She had endured rude customers before, but Chloe Harrington made a sport of destroying people. The surrounding tables, including an investment banker named Richard Cole and a fashion editor named Sylvia Vance, pretended not to hear, though their eyes flicked over with morbid curiosity. "I'll just pour your water," Clara whispered, her voice tight. "You'll do nothing," Chloe spat. But before she could demand a new server, the heavy mahogany doors of the restaurant swung open. The ambient chatter in the room died instantly. Dominic Ashford had arrived. He moved with a lethal, silent grace that seemed impossible for a man of his towering height. Dressed in a bespoke charcoal suit that clung to broad shoulders, his presence sucked the oxygen out of the room. He had raven black hair, sharp, aristocratic features, and eyes so dark they looked like polished obsidian. There was an unnatural stillness to him, a predatory calm that made the wealthiest men in the room suddenly feel like prey. Chloe's cruel sneer vanished instantly, replaced by a brilliant, practiced smile. She sat up straighter, adjusting her silk neckline to show more skin. "Dominic," she purred as the maître d' practically bowed while escorting him to table 4. "I was beginning to think you were a myth." Dominic did not smile back. He didn't even look at her initially. His gaze swept the room, analytical and cold, before finally settling on the chair across from her. He sat down without waiting for the maître d' to pull the chair out. "Miss Harrington," he said. His voice was a low, resonant baritone that sent a strange, involuntary shiver down Clara's spine. Clara took a step back, desperately wanting to retreat to the kitchen. But the floor manager, Mr. Abner, shot her a terrifying glare from across the room. "Serve the wine," he mouthed angrily. Clara swallowed hard, gripping the silver tray. She stepped forward to present the Bordeaux. "Good evening, sir. The Chateau Margaux, as requested by the Harrington table." Dominic turned his head to look at Clara. For a fraction of a second, his dark eyes widened imperceptibly. His nostrils flared just once, as if catching a sudden, overwhelming scent. He stared at her throat, right where her pulse fluttered wildly in panic. Chloe noticed the shift in his attention, and her jaw tightened with irrational fury. How dare this fat, sweating waitress draw even a second of Dominic Ashford's gaze away from her? It was an insult, As Clara turned slightly to set the heavy bottle on the table, Chloe's stiletto shot out from beneath the tablecloth. It was a deliberate, vicious movement. The sharp heel caught Clara's ankle right as she shifted her weight. With a startled gasp, Clara pitched forward. Time seemed to slow down. The silver tray flew from her hands. The $3,000 bottle of wine hit the edge of the marble table and exploded into 100 jagged shards. Clara crashed to the hard floor, landing heavily on her hands and knees right in the epicenter of the shattered glass. The dark red wine splashed everywhere, soaking her white shirt, looking violently like a crime scene. A collective gasp echoed through the dining room. A sharp, agonizing pain flared in Clara's right palm. A thick shard of glass had sliced deeply into her skin. Crimson blood, bright, real, and intensely metallic, began to pool on the white marble, mixing with the spilled wine. Chloe threw her head back and let out a sharp, mocking laugh that echoed in the stunned silence. "Oh my God," she shrieked, pointing at Clara. "Look at this clumsy, fat cow. You just ruined a fortune in wine because you can't even carry your own weight. Get out of my sight before I have you arrested for property damage." Clara squeezed her eyes shut, hot tears finally spilling over her lashes. The pain in her hand was blinding, but the public degradation was worse. She tried to push herself up, but her bleeding hand slipped on the wet floor, sending her back down to the glass. She waited for the manager to come screaming, waited for the security to drag her out by her collar, but the shouting never came. Instead, the temperature in the restaurant seemed to plummet by 20 degrees. Dominic Ashford did not look at the shattered glass. He did not look at the ruined tablecloth or the spilled wine. His obsidian eyes were locked entirely on the bright red drops falling from Clara Jenkins's hand. To the humans in the room, it was just blood, but to Dominic, the ancient ruler of a sovereign hidden species that had walked the earth since the dawn of civilization, the scent hitting his senses was nothing short of a cataclysm. It was the scent of the Marana bloodline, the rarest, purest lineage of human vampire ancestry thought to have been eradicated 400 years ago. It was a bloodline that commanded absolute loyalty from his kind, a scent that sang to the darkest, most primal parts of his soul. It didn't just smell like sustenance. It smelled like power, like a forgotten kingdom. It smelled like his mate. "Clumsy idiot," Chloe scoffed, dabbing a drop of wine off her silk dress with a napkin. "Dominic, I am so sorry. The help in this city has become absolutely feral. I'll have my father shut this place down by tomorrow morning." Silence. The word was spoken softly, but it cracked through the air like a physical whip. Chloe choked on her next sentence, her eyes widening in shock. The entire restaurant froze. Even the string quartet halted mid-note, their bows hovering awkwardly over their cellos and violins. Dominic stood up. He bypassed Chloe entirely, stepping around the table with that same terrifying, silent grace. To the absolute horror of the elite patrons watching, the billionaire did not call for a manager. He dropped to one knee right into the puddle of wine and shattered glass, entirely unconcerned about his bespoke suit. Clara flinched, pulling her bleeding hand against her chest, her face burning with shame. I'm sorry," she sobbed quietly, unable to look him in the eye. "I'll clean it up. Please don't look at me. I'll clean it. Do not apologize," Dominic said, his voice a dark velvet rumble that bypassed her ears and seemed to vibrate directly in her chest. He reached out. His hands were large, strong, and impossibly cold. He gently took her trembling, blood-soaked hand, his thumbs carefully avoiding the jagged cuts. Clara gasped, expecting him to be repulsed by her size, her sweat, her low status. Instead, he cradled her hand as if it were the most precious artifact on earth. "Look at me," Dominic commanded softly. Clara forced her eyes up. What she saw paralyzed her. His dark eyes had shifted. A ring of terrifying luminescent crimson had bled into his irises. The sheer intensity of his gaze stripped away the restaurant, the crowd, the noise, leaving only the two of them in a suffocating bubble of tension. Behind them, Chloe finally found her voice. Her face was flushed with ugly, indignant rage. "Dominic, what are you doing? She's a filthy waitress. Let go of her immediately. She practically threw herself at you." Dominic didn't turn around. He didn't even blink. "Mr. Abner," Dominic called out, his voice echoing in the dead silence of the room. The floor manager practically sprinted forward, pale and sweating. Mr. Ashford? Sir, I am so deeply sorry. This girl will be fired instantly. I will have the police escort her. If you or anyone in your establishment attempts to touch her, I will dismantle this restaurant brick by brick and bury you under it. Dominic stated, his tone so factual, so devoid of theatrics, that Mr. Abner physically stumbled backward. Dominic finally stood effortlessly, pulling Clara up with him. She was heavy, but to him she weighed nothing. He kept her bleeding hand elevated, pulling a silk handkerchief from his breast pocket and wrapping it carefully around her palm. The fabric instantly stained red, and Clara saw Dominic's jaw clench tightly, as if he were fighting an agonizing internal battle. He turned his head to look down at Chloe Harrington. The air pressure in the room seemed to crush inward. "You stuck your foot out, Miss Harrington," Dominic said. Chloe laughed nervously, her bravado faltering. I did no such thing. She tripped over her own fat feet. Dominic, please, people are staring. I have watched empires crumble to dust. Do you truly believe a petulant child throwing a tantrum could deceive me? Dominic stepped forward, placing himself squarely between Clara and Chloe, shielding the waitress entirely. Tell your father the Ashford conglomerate is pulling all capital from Harrington Real Estate. The merger is dead. By tomorrow morning, your family's stock will plummet by 70%. By Friday, you will be filing for bankruptcy. Chloe's mouth opened and closed like a dying fish. You can't be serious. Over a fat waitress. My father is Arthur Harrington. You can't do this. I have just done it, Dominic replied coldly. And if you ever speak to her, look at her, or breathe in her direction again, bankruptcy will be the gentlest of your punishments. He turned back to Clara. The terrifying predator vanished, replaced by a quiet, fierce protector. The rest of the room was entirely stunned. Billionaires did not ruin empires over minimum wage waitresses. It defied reality. What is your name? Dominic asked softly, his crimson-ringed eyes locking onto hers. Clara, she stammered, her heart hammering wildly against her ribs. Clara. He tasted the name on his tongue, his fangs subtly grazing his lower lip. You are leaving this place with me, now. The biting chill of the Manhattan night air hit Clara like a physical blow as Dominic led her out of the restaurant. Behind them, the stunned silence of the dining room finally broke, erupting into a chaotic symphony of frantic whispers, ringing cell phones, and the panicked shouts of the floor manager. But Clara could barely hear any of it over the rushing blood in her own ears. A sleek, customized black Maybach was idling at the curb. A towering chauffeur in a dark suit immediately opened the rear door, his eyes respectfully averted. Get in, Dominic instructed, his hand hovering just inches from her back, guiding her without forcing her. Clara hesitated on the curb. The reality of the situation was crashing down on her. Her cheap, rubber-soled shoes were sticky with spilled wine. Her polyester uniform was stained a violent purple, and her right hand was wrapped in a billionaire's ruined silk handkerchief, throbbing with a dull, rhythmic agony. Mr. Ashford, I can't, she stammered, her breath pluming in the cold air. I appreciate what you did in there, but I need this job. My sister Lily, she has tuition due next week. And my medical bills. If I leave, Mr. Abner will blacklist me from every hospitality agency in the city. Dominic stopped. He turned to fully face her, the neon streetlights reflecting in his obsidian eyes. Clara, he said, his voice lowering to a hypnotic, steady cadence, you will never have to worry about a biller job or a man like Mr. Abner for the rest of your natural life. The life you knew 30 minutes ago is over. Please trust me. There was something compelling in his gaze, an ancient gravitational pull that overrode Clara's deeply ingrained survival instincts. Trembling, she slid into the cavernous back seat. Dominic followed, the heavy door shutting with a solid, isolating thud. The city noise instantly vanished, replaced by the hushed hum of the engine. As the car glided into the traffic, Clara pressed herself against the leather door panel, acutely aware of how much space she took up. She wrapped her arms around her thick waist, a defensive posture she had adopted years ago to hide her stomach. She felt grotesque, sitting next to a man carved from marble and wealth. You are shivering, Dominic noted. Before she could protest, he unbuttoned his bespoke charcoal suit jacket and draped it over her trembling shoulders. It smelled faintly of cedar ozone, and something unidentifiable, something dangerously intoxicating. "Why are you doing this?" Clara whispered, a tear slipping down her cheek. "Women like Chloe Harrington, they are the ones who get rescued. They are the ones men like you notice. I'm just the fat girl who drops the wine." A low, vibrating growl emanated from Dominic's chest, a sound so primal and inhuman that the chauffeur up front visibly stiffened. Dominic closed his eyes for a fraction of a second, reigning in a violent surge of instinctual rage. "Chloe Harrington is a hollow shell wrapped in silk," Dominic said quietly, his gaze burning into hers. "Humanity has been poisoned by superficiality. They worship fragility. They praise bones and starvation, mistaking weakness for elegance. But my kind, we see the truth. We see the blood." "Your kind," Clara echoed, her brow furrowing. Dominic gently reached for her injured hand. He slowly unwrapped the blood-soaked silk handkerchief. The deep laceration on her palm was still sluggishly bleeding. "Do not be afraid," he murmured. Clara watched in a paralyzed trance as Dominic brought her wounded hand toward his face. His perfectly sculpted features shifted, his cheekbones seemed to sharpen, and the irises of his eyes bled from obsidian to a terrifying, luminescent crimson. As his lips parted, Clara saw the distinct lethal gleam of elongated fangs. A scream locked in her throat, but fear was instantly swallowed by an overwhelming supernatural calm that radiated from his touch. Dominic pressed his lips to her bleeding palm. His tongue, impossibly warm, swept over the jagged cut. Clara gasped. A jolt of electricity shot up her arm straight to her heart. The agonizing sting of the glass wound vanished completely, replaced by a soothing deep heat. When Dominic finally pulled back, wiping a single drop of her blood from his lower lip with his thumb, Clara stared at her hand in absolute shock. The skin was flawlessly whole. Not a scar, not a scratch remained. "What are you?" she breathed, her heart hammering against her ribs. "I am the sovereign of a world that lives in the shadows of yours," Dominic answered, his fangs retracting as his eyes slowly returned to their dark, bottomless state. "And you, Clara Jenkins, carry the rarest bloodline on this earth, the Marana lineage, a bloodline of ancient queens. For 3 centuries, I believed your kind was extinct. I came to New York to finalize a petty human corporate merger, entirely unaware that I was about to find my salvation holding a tray of wine." The Maybach smoothly descended into a private, heavily fortified underground garage. They had arrived at the Onyx Spire, Dominic's impenetrable Manhattan fortress. "I don't understand," Clara said, tears of absolute bewilderment falling freely now. "I'm nobody. I'm drowning in debt. I'm invisible." "You were invisible because you were surrounded by the blind," Dominic corrected fiercely. He stepped out of the car and offered her his hand. "Welcome home, Clara." The next morning, the financial world woke up to an unprecedented bloodbath. Clara woke up in a bed the size of a small island, wrapped in Egyptian cotton sheets that felt like spun clouds. Sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a panoramic, dizzying view of the Manhattan skyline. For a wild moment, she thought it had all been a fever dream, but then she looked at her right hand. It was perfectly smooth. A soft knock drew her attention to the massive oak doors. A quiet, impeccably dressed maid entered carrying a silver tray with fresh coffee pastries and a tablet. "Good morning, Miss Jenkins," the maid said warmly. "Mr. Ashford had a wardrobe brought up for you. He is waiting in the library when you are ready." Clara showered in a marble bathroom larger than her entire apartment. She found a stunning, soft emerald wrap dress hanging in the closet. Unlike the cheap, tight uniforms she was forced to wear, this dress was crafted specifically for her body. It draped elegantly over her curves, accentuating her thick hips and full bust, making her feel something she hadn't felt in a decade: beautiful. When she walked into the sprawling 2-story library, Dominic was standing by the window, a phone pressed to his ear. He looked devastatingly handsome in a simple black dress shirt, the sleeves rolled up to reveal muscular forearms. "Liquidate their offshore assets by noon," Dominic was saying into the phone, his voice merciless. "I want Arthur Harrington to understand that his daughter's arrogance cost him his legacy. Yes, burn it all down." He ended the call and turned to Clara. For a moment, the ancient vampire king simply stared at her, utterly captivated. "You are radiant," he breathed, crossing the room to stand before her. Clara blushed, looking down at the tablet she had brought from the bedroom. "The news! Dominic, it's everywhere!" The headlines on the tablet were screaming in bold red letters. "Harrington Empire collapses overnight. Stocks plummet 80%. SEC launches emergency investigation. Chloe's father is ruined," Clara said softly, the magnitude of Dominic's power finally sinking in. "You really did it." "I told her I would," Dominic replied easily, as if discussing the weather. He reached out gently, tucking a stray lock of hair behind Clara's ear. "No one disrespects the Queen of the Night Court and escapes without consequence." "Dominic, I don't know how to be a queen," Clara confessed, her insecurities bubbling up again. "Look at me. Even in this beautiful dress, I'm still me. The society out there, the people in your circles, they will laugh at you for choosing someone who looks like me." Dominic's hands gripped her shoulders, firm and grounding. "Listen to me very carefully," he commanded, his eyes glowing with that terrifying, beautiful crimson light. "Human society is a fleeting joke. They starve their women, demanding frail frames, because weak men are terrified of true presence. But in our world, in the immortal courts, your physical form is the ultimate symbol of vitality, power, and fertility. The Marana queens were warriors who carried the survival of our species in their blood. Your curves, your softness, your strength, it commands the absolute worship of my kind. When I look at you, I do not see a flaw. I see a goddess who finally returned to her throne." Clara's breath hitched. For the first time in her life, the crushing weight of society's judgment shattered. The shame she had carried in her own skin evaporated under the burning devotion in the vampire king's eyes. "Sir," the voice of Benson, the chauffeur, echoed from the doorway. "Apologies for the interruption, but Chloe Harrington has bypassed the lower security desk. She is in the ground floor lobby, screaming to speak with you." Dominic's jaw tightened. "Have security throw her into the street." "No," Clara said suddenly. Her voice was steady. It surprised even her. Dominic looked at her, an eyebrow raised in quiet admiration. "No, let her come up to the private elevator bay," Clara said, lifting her chin. "I want to speak with her." Minutes later, the polished steel doors of the penthouse elevator slid open. Chloe Harrington stood there, a frantic, disheveled mess. Her designer makeup was smeared from crying her hair in knots. She looked nothing like the icy predator from the restaurant. When Chloe saw Clara standing tall, dressed in emerald, flanked by the most powerful man in the world, she physically recoiled. "Dominic, please," Chloe begged, stepping forward, ignoring Clara entirely. "My father is having a heart attack. The banks have frozen our accounts. I'm sorry about the waitress. I'll pay her whatever she wants. Just reverse the hostile takeover." Dominic remained silent, his arms crossed over his chest. He deferred entirely to Clara. Clara stepped forward. The heavy orthopedic shoes were gone. She wore nothing but the quiet confidence of a woman who had just realized her own immense worth. She looked down at the shivering heiress. "You spent your entire life believing your money and your size gave you the right to break people," Clara said, her voice echoing coldly in the marble hall. "You thought the world was a glass floor you could walk on while people like me scrubbed the cracks. But you forgot one thing, Chloe." Chloe looked up, tears streaming down her hollow cheeks. "What? Glass breaks," Clara whispered, "and you're the one standing barefoot in the shards. Leave this building and never ever cross my path again." Chloe sobbed, dropping to her knees, but the elevator doors mercilessly slid shut, banishing the ruined heiress back to the mortal world she had just lost. Clara turned around. Dominic Ashford, the immortal king of the shadows, slowly lowered himself to one knee before her, bowing his head in absolute eternal submission. "My queen," he murmured, and for the first time in her life, Clara Jenkins felt utterly weightless. The ultimate karma, Clara went from an underpaid, humiliated waitress to the absolute ruler of an immortal empire, proving that true power and beauty are never defined by society's toxic standards. Chloe thought her wealth made her untouchable, but she learned the hard way that you never know who is watching from the shadows. If you love this dramatic tale of supernatural revenge and fierce romance, smash that like button, share this story with your friends, and subscribe for more jaw-dropping audio dramas.